Hello, I'm Bryan Thao Worra, a Lao Minnesotan poet and currently the board chair of the Minnesota Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans, and I recently gave a statement to the Star Tribune on a number of issues facing our communities here that I thought I'd read aloud here for your convenience, perhaps during a lunchtime break or some of it. So thank you for listening. I think of an old Confucius saying that wisdom begins when we start calling things by their proper names. This drove a lot of my work to hold the door open for other communities to see the possibilities in sharing our stories in our own words and on our own terms. Whether we've been here 50 years or 30 or 20 or 10, Minnesota has shown time and time again that our refugee communities from the Asian, African, and so many other diasporas can thrive when given the opportunity to share their stories with our fellow Minnesotans. This has reverberations not just across Minnesota, but across the U.S. and around the globe in meaningful, tangible ways, to see not only who we have been and are today, but who we can be, to see possibilities and futures we see ourselves in. In the aftermath of civil wars, time and time again, one of the hardest things is always coming to terms with the idea that we must envision a future we all are a part of, or none of us will have futures. Much of my work over the decades has been preparing for the conversation next year as America turns 250 years old in 2026, taking to heart that old Charlie Brown question, what have we learned? What will those of us who escaped from the wars of Southeast Asia bring to the table in the conversation of what democracy means, making the transition from monarchies and authoritarian systems and rigid hierarchies to a republic where we have to be a part of the decision-making process? We have to be a part of vibrant but often contentious civic conversations. We cannot be passive. Being merely obedient is not a certain route to stability and recovery, nor does it help plant the seeds and legacy of a renaissance so necessary for lasting change and peace. For context, much of my approach does come from a particular zone of privilege from having been raised by Americans for the first 18 years of my life, particularly my sense of social mobility, social responsibility, and how we might participate in democracy. What my upbringing taught me was the importance of free speech and the importance of seeking plurality, not monolithic uniformity of voice. I rarely encouraged a monotone range of opinions among fellow immigrants and refugees. We have to value having very different opinions before us in order to create an informed consensus and rebuild our cultures, our heritage, in ways that bring out the best in all of us. I was among the very first Lao to be naturalized in 1976. It was Flag Day during the American bicentennial, so I took my vow to heart at 3 years old to do my best to help America form a more perfect union, as best as I came to understand it over the years. I initially arrived in Minnesota to help a new newspaper help Vermont get news they could use and to share their stories with one another after I briefly worked in Washington, D.C. with one National Development. In D.C., just started my career in the nonprofit sector assisting refugees, the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans was there for me as a young man. Their staff and executive director were amazing resources on so many challenging issues we faced. Their guidance informed my work in the field to this day. I know they had a positive effect on the other organizations and community builders in Minnesota as well. I saw this firsthand as I worked closely with so many other Asian American and Minnesotan nonprofits and projects in the 2000s to the present. And I will always believe the councils were one of the best investments of the Minnesota legislature nearly 40 years ago to support new Americans emerging in the state. One of the best parts of the work is that there are over 60 different nations and ethnicities with roots in Asia that the council engages with. Some have been here since the early 20th century, others arrived 50 years ago, a few only a few years ago, and often the council is engaged in groundbreaking work building bridges, connecting communities, and building capacity, giving youth and elders a chance to experiment in democracy, community service, and adapt into life in America. This isn't easy for many who come from often very challenging, if not despotic conditions where they were seen as the enemy, the other, inferior, or unfit and something to be exterminated just for being. How do we rebuild trust and help one another see our shared humanity in Minnesota? This isn't as simple as turning on a light switch on or off, or handing over a cookbook on the perfect green bean casserole. It takes work. I think it's important that the Council work to help these diverse voices come forward for the 50th anniversary, because soon many other communities will be observing similar significant milestones, and we should surely have a sense in place as Minnesotans how we can ease the path forward for others and reduce barriers to help them tell their stories, to reconnect and see our interconnections. Next year marks the 60th anniversary since Hubert Humphrey made a historic trip to Laos and Southeast Asia. 2023 marked the anniversary of the end of the U.S. secret bombing in Laos, and many were shocked to discover the old cluster bomb factory in Minnesota was now a Costco. April 30th marks the fall of Saigon, and the USS Duluth was one of the ships that evacuated 7,000 Vietnamese allies and their families in a desperate fight for safety during Operation Frequent Wind. In a few weeks it is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Long Chen, the secret airbase the CIA turned into the second largest city in Laos at the time, and a key date for the Hmong and others such as the Khmer, Taidam, Mien, and others who served in the special guerrilla units. There are so many stories to tell, especially those connected to Minnesota. It's worth fighting to hear them out. I run into those who say that if we didn't say things before, we don't get to say them now, and I really don't think that's how it works in America in my experience. Sometimes it wasn't safe. Sometimes the memories were buried. Sometimes there's a lot of fear, grief, loss, and heartache that kept them from stepping forward or asking for a spotlight with the community. Minnesotans have said time and time again we can expand the table. We can make room for one another when we're ready. And for many of our elders that time is now. Memories are important. The idea that we can find funds and resources to support Minnesotans gathering together to more fully understand what happened during such a momentous era in our history, especially from those directly involved in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, while we are less than 20 years away from losing those voices permanently, doesn't sit well with me. As we mark the very first half-century of Southeast Asians in America, not making an effort to organize and recognize that milestone because veterans and their families didn't submit an application and move in way doesn't sit right with me, and many others I've spoken to across Minnesota. I would be so ashamed for the rest of my life if we didn't reach for a way to honor that legacy, our shared story. Over the decades, the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans has had the privilege of working closely with all the political parties reflected in the Minnesota legislature. Many of the Southeast Asian veterans and their families from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia were taken under the wings of Republicans who were staunchly anti-communist. Many of the DFL also took Southeast Asians as mentees and supported them during cases such as the 1998 KQRS protest, when a DJ suggested that the Hmong, quote, assimilate or hit the road, unquote. There have been many issues that we've been able to find common ground on for the collective good, and I believe we'll continue to find a path forward for all. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree and just bring things to a vote or larger public conversations. The Council must often navigate challenges that require taking positions that are unpopular with some who benefit from things staying the way they are, or supporting a particular narrative or sense of expediency. We've had people walk in also expecting that we can just wave a wand and instantaneously disperse funds or stop deportation proceedings or get money back from casinos, which is not something we can do. I feel an agency like the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans can do tremendous good keeping us connected or finding solutions that meet the needs of all Minnesotans. Sometimes the councils and their constituents find open doors and welcome hearts, sometimes less so. Sometimes we're lucky to have Asian Minnesotan legislators, and some years we don't have any. But there are often complex interrelationships between communities and abroad where it can become very challenging for Minnesotans to help their families and others grow and succeed, and we need an agency that can connect one another to the best information possible to make informed decisions. For example, we can see this with issues such as sending money or supplies to relatives who might be designated as criminals, insurgents, or terrorists by a government in power that's recognized by the United Nations, even though they were U.S. allies during a conflict. What should Minnesota's legislators and nonprofit organizations know when facing this scenario, and how do they connect to their constituents to understand all the possible nuances in a scenario like this? It doesn't take a crystal ball to see that in an ever-increasingly connected world, more resources are needed than ever on such matters. There's so much more that can be said, but I do hope that this gives you some sense of the scope and range of what we're working with today. I'm Bryan Thao Worra, and thank you for listening.